Okay, Zok the Heilige Gemara. So we finished off at the bottom of the Omega yesterday, and we finished off with a mystery. We have a brisa that tells us that Hamamana Acherim Imoy al Peschoi Val Chagigasoi. Reuben buys himself an animal and says, "This animal is my Korbon Pesach." So this animal has the kedusha of a Korbon Pesach. Now I want to get people to register with me, right? And offset part of my expense. So I want to have people register with me. So a regular person takes money and he says, "Listen, I'm not buying the animal myself. I'll let somebody else buy it. So I'm taking this money and being makdish this money. This money will be for my Korbon Pesach." So Reuben comes with his money that he was makdish in Korbon Pesach. He goes to Shimon, who has an animal that already has a kedusha Korbon Pesach, and he says, "I'm going to give you this money, and I want to be part of your Korbon." Now that the Mishnah says, "Moish shebiyadai chulin." When you accept this money, you the owner of the animal, accept this money that's kodesh from the person who wants to join in your Korbon, the money becomes chulin. However, but if you just sell any other Korbon, it's not yours. You can't sell it. So the sale doesn't work. So the first thing we need to know is, why is it that the sale of a Korbon Pesach works, yet the sale of the other type of Korbon doesn't work? A. And B is, why would the money be chulin? Does that make sense? Normally, if you have money of chulin, right, and you want to be paida, a behem of kodesh, so you give them money, the chulin money, which takes on the kedusha instead of the behema, which will become chulin that you'll own. Here, you're being paid a kodesh, an animal, with money that's kodesh, and magically, the money becomes chulin when you give it to me. How does that work? So those are two mysteries we have to deal with. Mystery one is, let me just finish the sentence. Mystery one is, what's the difference between standard korbanos and the Pesach? And mystery two is, why does the money become chulin? Sorry, what were you saying?
Does it have anything to do with the fact that if you were to touch a Sefer Torah, your hand now becomes Tomei? Because you're touching Kedusha, and off of Kedusha would come Chulin. So maybe the same thing by the Moed.
This is a financial thing. Tumah spreads. Tumah spreads. If I'm Tomei and you touch me, you become Tomei. I don't become Ois Tomei. We don't transfer my Tumah to you. Tumah has a completely different set of rules. David, I'm sorry for disappointing you. I was guilty of false advertisement. I said we're learning Daf Tzadik this morning, and we didn't. But we're learning Tzadik now.
We did part of Daf Tzadik.
We barely got started. Yeah. So I apologize, but today here we're going to finish Daf Tzadik. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not worried. You know what? Yesterday I learned that bottom piece of 89 at the bottom. And then this morning. Oh no, sorry. I did the whole Amud because you were an Amud behind. Then this morning, I heard it again by you. And then I had to daven again by, what's his
Werner.
name? By Werner, because he didn't have a minyan. So they needed a 10th person. So I went there. And then I learned it with the Daf Chaim. And I still don't fully get it.
Okay, well, I'm
now
happy
I have
that you're
to hear it for the fourth time.
Because I'm very happy to have a tzaddik join us to learn Daf Tzadik. So it's perfectly appropriate.
Yes.
Yeah, they always say fourth time's the charm, right?
I'm hoping.
Yesterday I was dizzy because the whole day I was learning about pot, pay test. So I got dizzy. But now I'm going to learn with a tzaddik, so I'll be okay.
You put it together, what do you get?
You can start now.
Okay. So we got that, Moshe. Remember, it's all being recorded. So I'll call upon them. So let's just review. So the two mysteries that we have to deal with today is, why is the Korbon Pesach maneshtana halayla azemi kala leilos? Why is the Korbon Pesach different than every other Korbon, where every other Korbon you could not sell, yet a Korbon Pesach you could sell? That's question number one. And question number two is, how is it possible to have a transaction where you're swapping kodesh with kodesh and the money mysteriously becomes chulin? So before we go weiter, I gave a hakdama which took up a lot of time this morning, and that's why I couldn't go further. But I felt the hakdama was integral to be able to understand what's going on over here. So the moving pieces that we have to discuss is the general rule about selling kodesh. Kodeshim belongs to the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's kodesh. You can't sell it, which explains why if you sell your shlam, only also like klum. However, there's a shita of Rabbi Yosy Aglili who holds kachim kalim is mamam bailam, which means you own, as an owner, you own the kachim kalim. So this brisa here that says according to Rabbi Yosy Haglili, who holds that Kodeshim Kalam is Mom Bailam, this would not be true. According to Rabbi Yosy Haglili, you can actually sell your shlomim. You can sell your shlomim. So this brisa cannot be going according to Rabbi Yosy Haglili. This is going according to the man who holds that even a Kodeshim Kalam doesn't belong to you, which then requires explanation. Pesach is also Kodeshim Kalam. Why is a Korbon Pesach different? And why is a Korbon Pesach, like I said, Manishtana Halayla Zeh, why is a Korbon Pesach different than all other Korbanos that you are allowed to sell it? So we're going to find that there are two reasons offered why you might be able to sell your Korbon Pesach. Reason number one is Pesach, unlike every other Korbon, and this is the svara that the Gemara is going to attribute to Rebbe. Rebbe said Pesach is different than even a Kodeshim Kalam. And Pesach, when you're makdish an animal for a Pesach, your kedusha doesn't penetrate the whole animal. There's part of the animal that gets retained by the original owner that's still personal money. Now, it doesn't mean bekamas. It doesn't mean like the head is kodesh and the legs aren't kodesh. Of course, the whole animal is kodesh as a Korbon, but there's some level of penetration that's not completely saturating the animal with kedusha. There's something that you could own. Now everything makes sense. If I have a part of the Korbon Pesach that I own, now I can sell that to you because it's mine. It's my personal animal. And if you give me money that's kodesh to buy my personal animal, so your money will now become choil when I get it, because I'm actually selling you a part of the animal that's not kodesh for money that's kodesh. When the swap is done, your part of the animal becomes kodesh, and now I get the money. That's one explanation for this price. Abaye wanted to suggest a different explanation, which he said the big boys, the Titans, don't agree with my pshat, but if it wasn't for the Titans, this is the pshat that I would learn. What I would learn is the Korbon Pesach is like any other Korbon. And when you're makish it, the kedusha fully penetrates it. And you have nothing in it, you cannot sell it. So how does this transaction work when I'm being the mana acher mal pesach? What's occurring? The answer is when you set aside money for your Korbon Pesach, you take $100, say this is for my Korbon Pesach, you're not really being makish the money. The money is remaining chulun. You're just stating you're planning to buy a Korbon Pesach with it, but the money is actually not becoming kodesh. It remains chulun. And I don't own any animal because I was makish animal to all kodesh. So what is the transaction? I give to you the right to join me in my Korbon. You're not getting any financial interest in it. It's mum and gavoya. I'm letting you eat a piece of it. That's all it is. I'm sharing a piece of the Korbon that I'm controlling with you, and you're giving me a gift. But it's not a transaction. The definition of a transaction is when you pay me something, it creates a kinyan and you get something back. So what you gave to me is linked to what I'm giving you. It's machayev me to give you something else. That's not how it works by Korbon Pesach. By Korbon Pesach, it's two independent things happening. I'm giving you a gift. I'm letting you enjoy part of my animal, and you're giving me a gift of free money. But they're not linked, so it's not really a transaction. That's how it works. Now, why should Pesach, where do you get this from, that Pesach should be different? So the Achrayim offer different svaras. Two of the svaras that Rabbi Elephant spoke out one was from the Divrei Chaim, who says that we learn it from the Mimet Habayis Miyosh Miseh. The Torah tells us that there is such a thing as people joining in on the Korbon. And therefore, since the Torah says there's such a thing as people joining in on the Korbon, you don't always when you put money aside to get a Korbon, you don't know how much it's going to cost you. Because of that, the Torah is telling us that Pesach works different, either like Rebbe's version that it's not completely kodesh, or like Abaya's version that when you're makdish the money doesn't fully penetrate the animal, or the money doesn't become kodesh. The Chazon Ish says from the mere fact that the Torah says that we want multiple people to get involved in the Korbon, that in and of itself tells us that the chalois of the kedusha on the animal will accommodate that possibility through one of the two ways, either Rebbe's version or Abaya's version, either through the fact that the kedusha will not saturate the animal, or that the money that someone sets aside for the Korbon Pesach is not kadosh, it stays chol. So Korbon Pesach is different. So everybody agrees Korbon Pesach is different. The question merely is, what's the halacha of a regular Kaddish Kalim? Is it Mum and Bailam or not? The brisa that we just learned clearly says that Kaddish Kalim is not Mum and Bailam and you can't sell it, but Pesach is still different because it has one of these two allowances. Now, what's the difference? Where does it happen nafkamina? Whether or not there's actually a transaction occurring. The says, according to Rebbe, we say the Kedusha doesn't penetrate the Korbon Pesach completely. So you can actually buy it from me. There's actually a transaction, a link transaction, tit for tat. You're giving me something, and by that you're being koine part of my animal. Or if it's two independent transactions, that you're giving me a gift and I'm giving you a gift. What nafkamina does it make? It makes a nafkamina, the halacha of esnan zoina. The halacha is, if one uses the services of a prostitute, and instead of paying her in cash or with Bitcoin or with e-transfer, he pays her with a goat. He gives her an animal. The halacha is that animal will always be possible to be used as a korban. So you can have a woman who's a prostitute who wants to bring a korban, and she got this animal from her work as a payment for her work. That animal is disqualified from ever being brought as a korban. It says in the Torah, "Savi esnan zoina u'mechir kelev beis Hashem alekecha." You could never ever bring that as a korban.
It can never be really undone. You can't be pointed. That's what I mean.
That's correct. That's correct. Right. Well, the question, what would be if she sold that to somebody else? Right. So I don't know what would happen with that. But I'll call them, she cannot definitely bring that as a korban. So now let's discuss what an esnan zoin is. An esnan zoin is only if I'm a chayiv myself to give her this animal for her services. If she's just giving me a free gift and I'm giving her a free gift, that's not an esnan. It's only an esnan if it's part of the transaction of a znos. So let's say that's correct. Right, that's correct. So every other animal, so we're talking about giving her a chulun animal, right? The main parsha of esnan zoin is referring to giving a woman a chulun animal. She will not be able to make it in the hektish. But what about if I gave a woman an animal that's already a korban? Let's say I had a korban shlom, it was kaddish already, and I gave that as an esnan. So will that work? So right off the bat, if you hold kaddish and kalim is not mama bailam, it for sure wouldn't work because it's not mine to give to her. It cannot be part of a transaction that I'm paying her for something because it's not mine, right? But maybe the Korbon Pesach would work, right? So let's talk about this a second. We know there's such a thing as esnan by kachim. There's actually machlokes. If there is, one sheet holds there is, another sheet holds there's a special pasuk to say there's not. But everybody agrees technically there could be esnan by kachim. So how would that be possible? According to Rabbi Yosy, who holds kachim kalam as mom and bailam, it's not a problem at all because it belongs to me, even though it's a shlomim, it belongs to me, and therefore my ownership in it is what I could barter for her services, and of course it'll take on an esnan. But if you hold Kaddish Kalim is lav mama bailam, then if I gave her a shlomim, it doesn't have any effect. I'm not giving her anything. It's not mine. It's just a animal factors. But the way we're learning Pshat and Korbon Pesach, let's think about it. If you learn like Rebbe, if you learn Korbon Pesach like Rebbe, where when I make it kodesh, the kedusha doesn't saturate the whole animal, and I'm retaining a portion for myself. So now, if I give it to her as an esnan, it's a perfect transaction. She's giving me a service, and with that, she's being koine on my animal. That would technically be an esnan because it's payment for a service that's linked to the transaction. But if you learn like Abaye is learning, why by a Korbon Pesach I can make that transaction because it's two independent gifts, so then it's not an esnan anymore. She's giving me her services, and I'm gifting her an animal. That's not an esnan. An esnan is it's only if it's tit for tat, if it's part of the transaction. If it's just a coincidence that she gives me a gift and I give her a gift, that won't give it the status of an esnan. Because it's not something that she's coined through her services. It's two independent gifts. So therefore, the way Abaye is learning, if you didn't hold like Rabbi Yosy Aglili, you wouldn't be able to make an esnan out of a Korbon Pesach because I'm not giving her anything that she's being koina for her services. It's two independent gifts. So once we have all these different pieces, now we can see how it all comes together. Yisrael, you're making it sound like I'm saying something that doesn't make sense. Okay, if it doesn't make sense, you attack. No, there's no holds barred. Okay.
But they are really linked because
They might be linked because I wouldn't give you the gift for nothing. In other words, you're telling me they're linked, just like by the Wii scandal. Of course they're linked. I'm giving you all this money because you're going to give me money. They're linked, but they're not technically linked. They're not financially linked. There's no choshim mishpat link in between the two payments. It happens to be it's not a kinyan. It's not shot they're linked in the kinyan. It's exactly like a Trudeau scandal. The money that I'm giving him is of course nothing to do with the services they're offering or not offering. It just happens to be independent, right? So that's exactly what this is. It's two independent things. Of course, one influences the other, but they're not directly coupled because of a financial transaction. And it's only an esnan if they're directly coupled from a financial transaction. Otherwise, not an esnan zoyna. The Gemara deals with reality. It's not condoning this, but the fact is this happens, so we have to deal with it. See, it's being recorded, so I have to be careful what I say. But at the end of the day, at least when we're talking about what you can do, it's using a goat to pay for services. In other places, the goat is the service. So at least it's called a go-to. It's called a go-to address. At least we don't have that by us. Okay. So let's go to the third from the bottom line. After, is it possible that Yadi Chavim Bavloi Taimid Haimilsa? Is it possible that maybe somebody can explain to me this mystery? Now we already have all the answers because I announced them before we started the sugya, but Ula wanted to know the explanation for this mystery. This fellow was makdish an animal, and the other fellow was makdish money. So when they swap it out, how does this transaction work that the money becomes chulin? Zokta Abaye, Amar Abaye, Ilav de Ukme Rabbi Oishia. If Rabbi Oishia didn't do and explain like that brisa, which brisa? The brisa that we're going to learn later in a couple of lines. The brisa that says that there's a machloikes tanoim if there's a din esnan on mukdashin. If you give a woman a carbon, will it take on the din of esnan? Both parties agree that technically it would fall under the classification of esnan. The question merely is there a special limud in the parsha of esnan to exclude kodshim from esnan? But technically, the transaction would be labeled as an esnan. And how did Reb Oishia explain that brisa? The brisa says that esnan chal al hamukdashim. It doesn't say what type of carbon. Esnan is chal on karbonos. So Reb Oishia said that you know what carbon it's talking about? It's talking about a Pesach. What does it mean? He gave a woman an esnan where there's a machlokes tanoim whether or not it works, but everybody agrees that technically it works. So what does the brisa mean when the brisa means you could give an esnan by giving kodshim to a woman? It's not referring to any kodshim because any kodshim wouldn't work because we don't hold like Rabbi Yosy Glili. We hold that kodshim is not mamon bailim, it's mamon gavoya. The only kodshim that's out there that we say has a din of mamon bailim will be a carbon pesach. So when the brisa says esnan chalal makdashin, it could only be referring to the carbon pesach. The Rebbe and it would work according to Rebbe. And Rebbe is the one who says that by a carbon pesach, the kedusha doesn't saturate it completely. So when I'm makdish an animal for carbon pesach, I've retained some portion that's mine personally, and that part that would be the esnan equation that's triggered to be mechayvus of to give it to her when she provides me with her service. So if it wasn't for the fact that that's how Rabbi Oishia explained this brisa, I would have taken a different approach. I would have said that the brisa that says esnan neschalam hektish applies to every type of kadishim kalim. And I would say that brisa is following the opinion of Rabbi Yosy Glili, who holds that every kadishim kalim is owned by its owner in a personal fashion, where it's my money, I can buy things with it. I can be mekadosh and isha with it, or I could use it as fulfilling my ischayvus towards a zayda. I would agree with how Rebbe understood the kedusha of a carbon pesach, where Rebbe says the kedusha doesn't saturate all animal. I would disagree, and I would say I would argue that by a Korbon Pesach, it's fully saturated with Kedusha. And therefore, I'm not providing anything to anybody when I'm giving away my Korbon Pesach. But so how would I explain why when someone contributes to my Korbon Pesach, why that transaction works and why that money becomes chulin? Because b'mois vadai mishayir inish. The person, when he's makdish money for the Korbon Pesach, he's not really making the money kodesh. He's just planning to use it to give me a gift so that I should let him join in my Korbon Pesach. And that's how I would have explained it. The meikara ki mafresh lahu, when any time a person sets aside money for a Korbon Pesach, adai to the haki mafresh lahu. What he has in mind is, I don't want this money to become kodesh. I just want to use this money as the gift that's going to soften up the owner of this Korbon's heart to let me participate in it. And then I would learn the Harebi. And it could be going according to Rebbe. And that's why the money it becomes chulin, because in fact he gets to keep it.
If he puts away $100 and it ends up costing him 80.
I'm sorry?
Let's say the Korbon Pesach costs 100. He puts aside 100 to buy the Korbon Pesach, right? It ends up costing him 80.
Right.
What happens to those 20?
It's also, if he wasn't makdish the money, that's not a problem. If he wasn't makdish the money, he puts it back in his pocket. If he's makdish it, then it's called Moshe's Pesach.
What does that mean he's makdish? His mind says, I'm putting this aside for Korbon Pesach?
I'm going to use it. This is what I'm going to use.
And what if it's the other way around? He tries to make a profit on it. Does that become hectic? So I buy the Korbon Pesach for 80, and then I start saying, you want to be, so I'm charging you 25 and him 25 and him 25, and I garner profit on being.
Why can't you do it? Why shouldn't you be able to do it? Why not?
That's not enjoying. We're making money off. You're living off the jail. No, it's okay to do it. That doesn't become kosher.
Yeah, I don't think when we say, even according to Rebbe, where I'm a shire some of the Pesach to myself, I don't think there's a dollar value you can place on it. And then once I collect a certain amount of money, there's nothing left. Right. It's the gift that keeps on giving. I can sell it to as many people as I want. It's the ultimate pyramid scheme.
Right. That's what I mean. Because people are they don't have a place they need to buy in, especially their Pesach. I'm sure
the best investment someone can make is to buy a Korbon Pesach. Yeah, he could sell it and sell it and sell it. Yeah. It's like a Moshe who sells covered. You never run out. Right? So Zakta Gemara. So therefore, Bahar Rabbi, and you'll be able to learn that the brisa of that Estan Chalal Makdoshin could go according to Rabbi. And that's why the mois in his hands would be chulun, or our brisa could be going according to Rabbi, because, and it would explain why the mois that the person who owned the animal gives away, that's why it's chulun. However, the Pesach lo mishar inish, because by Pesach a person doesn't leave over anything. With a mois vadei mishar inish, and in the mois a person would be mishar inish. So that's how I would be able to understand Rebbe. I wouldn't have to learn like Rabbi Oshia. Rabbi Oshia learns in Rebbe that I don't saturate the Korbon with Kedusha when I'm makdish it. I'll be able to argue and say what Rebbe means is that it's just independent gifts. Vahida kamukila Rabbi Oshia karebi, and that Rabbi Oshia stelled in our brisa by us that says, but the Korbon Pesach, the money becomes chulun, is following the sheet of Rebbe. Loy mukmina le anok karebi. I wouldn't be able to say that goes like Rebbe. The Pesach loy mishayir inish, because I hold that by the Pesach the kedusha completely saturates the Korbon. Uvamois mishayir inish. It's only in the money that I'm going to learn does not saturate the kedusha, doesn't go on the money. Because when I'm separating money, I don't want to be kodesh, and therefore v'haleka le'ukmei kerebi. I'm sorry. The brisa that we have at the bottom of Amma Beis that says that you cannot sell a shlomim cannot be consistent with Rabbi Yosy, because according to Rabbi Yosy Glili, that comes from Kalam is Mam and Bailam, I should easily be able to sell the shlomim, and the brisa by us says you can't. So our brisa you cannot say is going according to Rabbi Yosy. So it has to be going according to the Tana who holds that normally Kaddish and Kalim is not Mammon Bailam. But by Korbon Pesach, it's different. So that's what I would have done. But the hashta the ukmi Rabbi Oishia, like he, the Mamana Zoyna al Pischai, Rabbi he. But now the Rabbi Oishia said that the Braisa that says Estan Chalal Makdoshim does not apply to any other carbon because it's not following Rabbi Oishia Glili. Because according to Rabbi Oishia Glili, Esnan should easily be able to be Chal on any Kaddish and Kalim. But Rabbi Oishia is saying no. It wouldn't be Chal on Kaddish and Kalim. The Braisa that says that Esnan could be Chal would only apply to a Korbon Pesach. And it would go according to Rebbe, so the Brisa, when you say that the Brisa of Estan Chalal Makdoshim is referring to a Korbon Pesach, that forces you into the other understanding of Rebbe. That forces you into saying that when you made the Korbon Pesach, the animal itself, when you made it Kodesh, you didn't fully saturate that animal with Kedusha and you retained something for yourself. And therefore, when you give it to the woman, it actually becomes technically an esna. The way I'm learning Zok Abaye in how Pesach works, a Pesach would never be able to be an esnan because I don't have any ownership in it. And it's just a simple transaction of a gift to a gift, which wouldn't technically make it into a esnan. So the only way for me to explain a brayso that says the kachim could be an esnan would only be if it follows the shita of Rabbi Yosy. Okay, so now that we have these two mahalchim, and Abaye is saying that Rabbi Yosy does not learn like him, now let's figure out the details. Rabbi Yosy is the one who said that the brayso that says that you can give a woman as an esnan Korbon Pesach, that follows Rebbe's shita that the kedusha does not saturate the animal. Where exactly was that said? Mahi, the Rabbi Oishia. Where did Rabbi Oishia say this? The time we learned to the Brisa, Nosnan la mukdoshin besnana. We discussed this case already. If a man gave a woman an animal that was a carbon for an esnan, hare elu mutarin, it's going to be mutter. Oifais the chulin. What if he gave her birds that were chulin? Hare elu asurin. Of course they'll be also. Now, if you look at these two items, it seems that we should also say that a mukdashim esnan should also be an esnan. So how you begin? If you think about it, you should be able to make a chalachayim. Uma mukdashim shamum poisel behem. A carbon that we're talking about, which is not becoming esnan. A carbon, if it had a mum, it would be possible. So if it had the psul of mum, it would disqualify it from being a carbon. Yet ein esnan umechir chalalein. Yet we're saying that if it's used as an esnan, it would not become possible. So oifos birds, she'ein hamum posel behen. Birds do not become possible with hamum. The halacha is animals, cows, those type of animals become possible with hamum. Birds will not become possible with hamum. A bird is only possible if it's missing a limb completely. But any of these small little blemishes that passel a behema would not passel a mud. So oifos she'ein hamum posel behen. Einoy din she'ein esnan umechir chalalein. Madich animals, behemoths, which are prone to becoming puzzle as a carbon, because they, with a mum, it'll knock them off. Nevertheless, they're resistant to the psul of esnan. Birds, which are resistant to the problem of mummin, because they don't even have mummin, surely they should be resistant and immune from the psul of esnan. Zok to Gemara, Talmud Loimar, l'chol neder. L'chol neder, l'rabbis has oifos. L'chol neder tells us that not only are behemoths subject to the Isra of Esnan, oifos of chulin are also subject to the Isra of Esnan. Zok to Gemara, kal v'chomer l'mukdashim. So kal v'chomer for animals that are kodesh, because now I can flip the kal v'chomer around. Now that I have a pasuk to tell you that oifos, which are so kal, they can't even become possible with the moon, they're still subject to the problem of esnan. Surely a behemoth of kochim should also be subject to the psul of esnan. Because me'atama oifish she'ena mum poisel behen. Oifis which are less prone to a psul, even if they have a mum, they won't be posul. Nevertheless, esnan umechir chalalayen, they still will suffer from the problem of esnan mukdoshin, kachim, shamum poisel behen, that in fact will be subject to the psul of a mum. Surely the problem of esnan should also be applicable to mukdoshin. Tamad loimer l'chol neder prat linodur. The esnan passes something from making it into a neder, meaning if it's chulin, you cannot make it into a carbon. But if it was already kachim, that is immune from the psul of esnan. Prat linodur. So even though technically it would be possible to have a transaction where this animal should be a esnan, since the pasuk tells you l'chol neder, it's a gzeres hakasuv that animals of mekdoshim will not be subject to the psul of esnan. So let's analyze this. The only reason why we're saying that an animal of mekdoshim could not become pasul as a esnan is because the Torah reveals it in a special limud. Halav hachi, if it wasn't for the special limud, logically and technically it would be possible to have a psul of esnan by kachim. Hava mini mekdoshim chal isur esnan alein. It would be possible technically to have an esnan, but how could that be? If the carbon, if you don't look at Yosy Glili, and Kodesh column is not yours, how can I possibly make Kodesh column? How can I make my carbon shlomim or else esnan? I have no ownership in it. The answer would be is Rabbi Yosy says you're right. Every other carbon I have no interest in, but according to Rebbe, the way Rabbi Yosy understands Rebbe, the carbon Pesach is different. It's the only carbon where the owner retains a portion of it for himself, and that portion could be bartered where there's nus, and that would technically have the isur of esnan if it wasn't for the fact that the Torah tells us otherwise. My Rebbe, who is this Rebbe that Rabbi Yosy is learning from, that the carbon Pesach is different and the owner retains some interest in it? The Tanya we learned, Im yimat habayis mihiyos miseh. If there's not enough people to accommodate eating of an entire set, but we learn from there, in Yimad Habayis Midarshan, what if a person doesn't have enough money? What if a person is Yimad, he can't afford all of his Pesach expenses? He can't even afford the wood to roast the carbon Pesach. So we learn from there, Yimad Habayis Miyosh Miseh. If you don't have enough money, you can get that money from the set itself. Hachayehu Miseh. You can actually extract money out of the set itself to use it to take care of your needs for Pesach. And we learn Michdei Achila v'Loi Michdei Mekach. We learn that the only money that you're allowed to extract from this carbon Pesach is only money that's going to assist you in eating the carbon Pesach. But if you just wanted money because you wanted to buy stocks, you wanted to invest, but it wasn't something that were directly related to a necessary expense for Pesach, that you wouldn't be allowed to do. Rabbi Omer, Af Michdei Mekach. No, if I need money for anything at all, I could monetize my carbon Pesach. Shem ein loy. If there's a good deal on a stock and I feel I want to buy it, and I don't have the cash, memana acher imoy pescha. You're allowed to charge somebody money to join your carbon Pesach. V'al chagigasai, and the honest chagiga of $1 only. That chagiga was different. It's like a carbon Pesach. Umoy shebi chulun. And therefore, when someone pays me to join my carbon Pesach, that money will be chulun, and I could spend it on anything that I want. Why is that? Because when Klal Yisrael is makish to Pesach, it's with that shiur, it's with that limitation. Rabbi v'Rab Zera, Chad Omar be'etzim l'tzli Yosy. There's a machlokes in Rabbi and Rab Zera. Now we know we have a machlokes here between Rebbe and the Tanakama if it's only Pesach related or if it's also for stocks. But there's different levels. So Chad Omar be'etzim l'tzli Yosy, if what I need the money for is to buy wood to actually roast the animal, which is for the carbon Pesach itself, kula amaloi pligi, everybody would agree that you could extract money from. The kivin to the counter the Pesachu to go for the Pesach tummy. Since it's part of what I need to actually make the actual carbon, that the money that comes from the carbon can be used for that. Keep ligi, but where Rebbe and the Tanakama argue is the Matzu Mar. Matzu Mar are related to the Seder, but it's not the carbon Pesach itself. Rabbanan Sabri According to Rabban, you wouldn't be able to use money from somebody who chipped in with your Korbon Pesach to buy yourself matzah and mar. It's a different component. Rabbi Savar Kivan de Chsherei de Pesachu, since in order for you to be yoy to the Pesach, it's al matzah shemerayim yachlu keguva de Pesach tummy. It's still considered part of the Korbon Pesach, and I'm allowed to use the proceeds of the Korbon Pesach to buy those things. The Chad Omar, but another one of the two, Reb Zeir or Rabbah, learned the machlokes for Rebbe was much different. And he does as follows. The Matu Morinami Kul Amalei Pligi. Everybody agrees that you're allowed to monetize the Korbon Pesach to buy any supplies for the Seder. The Kivan the Machshir and the Pesach, since they're part of the Seder and they're needed as part of the mitzvah of the Korbon Pesach, they're considered to be like the Pesach, and I can surely use money from the Korbon Pesach to buy these items. Ki pligi the machlokes is likach boy chaluk, to buy a jacket, a little boy talis, to buy a shirt, something that's completely not related to the mitzvah sayyid. It's dafka things that are related to the seh, that are related to the carbon. Rabbi Savar haki atzmecha miseh. It means means you can enrich yourself from the seh, meaning you can use the money that you sell the seh for anything that you buy. Ulabaya the Amar, and according to Abaya, he learned that he loved if it wasn't for the fact that the Rabbi Ishia, the Titan, learned pshat, like we just said, that he passes not like Rabbi Ishia, that Kadashim is not Mammon Bailim, and the only type of carbon that could have become an Esnan could have been a Korbon Pesach, and it's following the Shil of Rabbi, who holds that the Kedusha doesn't saturate the Korbon Pesach or not makdish the animal. Oy bazoi, what would Abai have done? He would have said that the brisa that says that you could make an esnan by giving kadishim to a zoina, that would be by any kadishim column, not only a Korbon Pesach, any shlomim as well, because he holds like Rabbi Yosy the Amar kadishim column mamam bailamim. So when I give her any carbon that's kadishim column, I'm also giving her something that belongs to me, and therefore it would be triggered with esnan. But by the Korbon Pesach it wouldn't work, because we just said loy mishayir inish. By a Korbon Pesach, the way Abai is learning is that my kedusha completely saturates the Korbon Pesach, and I have no personal ownership in it, right? And the way the transaction works is that it's a reciprocal matana. Zok Gemara, but hakatani behedya shamanas kain hikdushu Yisrael as peschayim. Abaye can argue on a moira, but he can't argue on a brisa. And the brisa, when it explains Rebbe, it says the reason why Rebbe says you're allowed to monetize the Korbon Pesach is because the aldas kain shamanas kain hikdushu Yisrael as peschayim. So it's saying when I was makdish my animal, I was makdish my animal with a reservation. According to Abaye, Rebbe holds that when I'm makdish an animal, I'm not making any reservation at all. The kedusha penetrates it completely. It's when I'm makdish my money. It was almanas kain that it should have been kodesh. But here it says that the animal itself, I'm reserving the kedusha on. So how would Abai understand the words of this brisa describing Rebbe Shita? So what he means is not the animal itself. It means when people are going to set aside money to buy a Korbon Pesach, that's when they reserve kedusha. That's when they weren't planning to make it kodesh. They were planning to keep it choil, so they could do a matana swap with someone who has an animal of a Korbon Pesach, so they can join in. So just to summarize, we have the two things that we have to deal with is we have one brisa that says that you cannot sell kadashim kalam at all, but you could sell a Korbon Pesach, and the money that you get from it is chulin. That's one brisa. We have another brisa that says that you could technically a korban could become an esnan, and we need to explain what these things are. Now we have a Rabbi Yosy who holds kadashim kalam is mom and bailam. Now, the first brisa who says you can't sell kadashim kalam for sure cannot be going according to Rabbi Yosy. According to Rabbi Yosy, you could sell it; it's yours. But the brisa that says that an esnan could be kadashim could be, according to Rabbi Yosy, that's very simple. It's unreserved. Any kadashim kalam that you would give a woman as an esnan would become an esnan if it wasn't for the special pasuk. right? That's one option of how you could learn the Gemara. So you could learn that the brisa of Esnan Chalal Makdoshim is according to Rabbi Yosef Glili, and it's across the board. Every Kadashim column, if you give it as an Esnan, will become an Esnan if not for the pasuk. The brisa that we had that says you can sell Kadashim column would not be according to Rabbi Yosef Glili, but Pesach would have to be different. How would I explain Pesach? The way I would explain Pesach is that although the animal is completely kodesh, the money that someone set aside to buy that animal with remains chulin, and it's just a gift swap. So that works for Korbon Pesach, that the money I get is completely chulin, but it would never ever be able to make an esnan, because an esnan has to be a tit for tat transaction. That's one mahalach, and that's how Abai would have learned. But Rabbi Oishia tells us not like that. Rabbi Oishia tells us that even the brisa that says Esnan Chalal Makdoshim is not going according to Rabbi Yosef Glili. It's not going according to Rabbi Yosef Glili, and therefore any other carbon that you've given as an Esnan wouldn't do anything because it's not yours. You can't make it usher. But it's speaking specifically about a Korbon Pesach. By a Korbon Pesach, where's the transaction? The transaction is because Rabbi would learn that when I'm makdash a Korbon Pesach, I don't want the kedusha to saturate the animal. The kedusha is reserved, and part of the animal actually remains my personal money, and therefore, if I give it as an esnan, it's a real esnan, it's a real transaction, and it'll be usher. And that's exactly how he would explain our price as well. The reason why the money becomes chulin when I sell you my carbon is because although there's a lot of kedusha in this animal, there's part of that animal that's reserved for myself that's chulin that I can actually sell to you. And even though your money is kodesh, when you take that part of the animal that I'm selling to you, that money now becomes chulin and it becomes mine personally. So that explains the sugya. Now, what you're allowed to use the money for is dependent on the machlokes between Rabbi and the Rabbanon, which is also dependent on the machlokes Reb Zeir and Reb Acha. I believe it's Reb Zeir and Reb Acha. And the machlokes is everybody agrees that to buy wood with the proceeds of what you're selling the Korbon Pesach for, you're allowed to do because that's part and parcel of the Korbon Pesach itself. There's a shaila. What would be? It's Rabbi Reb Zeir. I'm sorry, it's Rabbi Reb Zeir. The area, the gray area, the area of machlokes would be if I want to buy matz and more with it, which aren't directly related to the Korbon Pesach, or if I wanted to buy stocks with it or anything else that wasn't related at all. The question is, would that also be included in the heter to use that money? And the limit is based on the mimet habayis v'hiyosh miseh. The widashim hiyosh miseh. You could only buy something that's going to help for the set, or you can buy anything you want, and you can extract the value from the set to buy anything you want. Those were the two approaches as to how to learn the heter of selling the Korbon Pesach and using the money for other things. Okay, beautiful. So now we'll do the Mishnah. The rest is easy. Zov sharash re'iyas. A zov who had two re'iyas. The halach is a zov, a male who has two re'iyas, he is tamei for 7 days, and at the end of the 7 days he toivos. So the halach is shoychnu elav b'shvi. What if the 7th day of his tuma was erev Pesach? So although right now he's tamei, he's going to toivel at the end of the day, and tonight when it comes time to eat the Korbon Pesach, he can eat it no problem. And therefore, a zov, even though he's at the last day of his Shiva Nekiyim, he could still be part of the Korbon Pesach. Rosh Shalosh, if he saw 3 times, that means he has to bring a carbon, which means on day 7, he's not yet allowed to eat any carbon, even day 7 at night. He has to wait till day 8 in the morning, and on day 8 in the morning is when he could bring his carbon. Now, what happens? So therefore, if a guy has to bring a carbon, if a zov has to bring a carbon, and on day 7 is erev Pesach, he has no solution. He cannot participate in the Korbon Pesach because the earliest he can eat kachim is tomorrow morning. But on day 8, you're allowed to check for him. Now let's think about it. If he already brought his carbon, of course you could check for him. He's a regular man. Obviously, we're speaking about somebody who they didn't bring the carbon for him yet. So they didn't bring the carbon for him yet. So how is he going to be able to eat tonight? He'll have to bring his carbon after the Korbon Pesach. Don't we have a rule that you're not allowed to bring any carbonos after the Korbon Tamid, and the only exception to that is the Korbon Pesach? Teretz is that for the sake of the Korbon Pesach, this is another exception to the rule. That you're not allowed to bring any carbon after the Korbon Tamid, Shalbein Arbaim, the exception is a Korbon Pesach, and the exception is also somebody who needs to bring his karbonis so that he should be able to eat the Korbon Pesach, that would also be allowed to be brought after the Korbon Tov. Okay, now let's talk about women. Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom. We know women are all about 7-11. 7 days of Nida and then 11 days of Ziva. I wonder if that's where the name came from. So Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom means during the 11 days she saw Dam 1 day only. So the halacha is, Midaraisa, she has to have 1 day of Naki, which will be the next day, and if that day is Naki, then she's fine again. So Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom means it's the day after she saw Dam. Since tonight she's going to be completely tahor, Sheichten Aleha, they can for sure shech for her. Sheichten Aleha b'sheni shelo. On the second day, not the day that she actually saw Dam, but the next day they'd be able to shech for her. Why? Because hopefully she won't have any riri today, and tonight she'll be able to eat the Korbon Pesach. What about Rasa Shnei Yomim? What if she saw 2 days in a row? Once again, Sheichten Aleha b'shlishi. They can shech for it on the Shlishi. Why? Because even if she saw Dam 2 days in a row, if the third day is Naki, then she'll be mutter to eat karbanos tonight. So therefore, even though during the day of the 3, during the Erev Yom Tov itself, she can't eat kachim, but tonight she'll be able to eat kachim. But what about Azava? Azava is a woman who has to count Shiva Nakim and bring a carbon. So Azava Shoichna Le B'Shmini. If it's her 7th day, she cannot, she's just like the Zav, who saw Shtei Riyos. She can't eat the carbon tonight because she needs to bring a carbon. But if it's the 8th day, which is the day that she could bring a carbon, just like the Zav, we would be able to include her in the Korbon Pesach B'Shmini. Omar B'Dam Rab, Shoichlin v'Zoichlin al Tful Yoim u'mechutz HaKippur. You're allowed to include in a Korbon Pesach somebody who's a Tful Yoim. A Tful Yoim is somebody who toivel today because he was tamei, and all he needs to do is wait for the evening, and then he's going to be allowed to eat kachim. So since, even though right now he can't eat kachim, but since we know tonight, when the time comes to eat the Korbon Pesach, he will be able to eat kachim. Therefore, he could be included in the Korbon Pesach and the Mechutz HaKippurim. Again, somebody who he's really tar, he just needs to bring a carbon. He could be included in the Korbon Pesach as long as they bring his carbon before he eats the Korbon Pesach. Zok the Mishnah weiter, the Ein Sheichten v'Zarkin al Tamei Sheretz. But someone who's a Tamei Sheretz, which really has the same attributes. A Tamei Sheretz can toivel now and he'll be tar tonight. Yet we don't include him in a Korbon Pesach, which we need to explain what's the difference. Either way, he'll be tar tonight. So why is it that we don't allow him to participate in a Korbon Pesach? Ula Amar, there's no difference. I've sheicht and mezorkin of Tamei Sheretz for the same reason, because tonight he could become tar. Why is it that if he's a Tful Yoim, where he'll be able to eat the Korbon Pesach tonight, even though he's tummy now, we let him participate in the Korbon Pesach. Tamei Sheretz nami chazi l'urta. A Tamei Sheretz is the same thing. Dr. Gemara mechusar tefillah. There's a very big difference. Someone who's a Tamei Sheretz, there's a major step in between him and his tahira. He has to go to the mikveh. But it's full. For Gemara, it's full yoim nami mechusar of shemesh. At full yoim, sure he toivel, but he's still missing an ingredient. It's not evening yet. So Gemara shimsham amela arva. The sun is going to set by itself. I don't have to worry that there's going to be a step involved that's not going to be fulfilled. It's going to, nighttime comes automatically. So therefore, a full yom will allow him to be part of a Korbon Pesach. But someone who can come with a sheretz who didn't toivel yet, if he didn't toivel yet, well, what if he doesn't toivel? Therefore, we won't let him be part of a Korbon Pesach. The Mishnah says that everybody agrees that someone who didn't bring his karbonis yet, he could be part of a carbon. What if his karbonis are not brought? So the Gemara, the only type of mechutz kippurim that will allow him to participate in the Korbon Pesach is if he already handed in to the Kohanim his money, so he's already done everything that he needs to do. If there's a mikveh right here, all he has to do is jump in. So the same way, if everything's all prepared and ready to go, I brought my money for the carbon, you're allowing me to be part of the Korbon Pesach, even though the carbon wasn't brought yet. So I wasn't by a sheretz as well, so I wasn't toivel yet, but I'm ready to go toivel. So tomorrow, Dilma Pasha. Yeah, you might be ready to go toivel, but what if you change your mind? What if you don't go? There's still a possibility that you're not going to fulfill your steps that you need to become tar. Therefore, we're not letting you participate in the Korbon Pesach. Well, what are you going to do if we don't end up bringing the Korbon Pesach? I'm sorry, if they don't end up bringing the karbonis that he needed to bring to qualify him for karbonis. So Gemara, Kivan the Mishrinu the Besdin, since he gave it over to the Besdin of Kaihanim, Rashi says, since he gave it to the Besdin, the way it worked is everybody who had to bring an oif would put, let's say, $10 into the bucket, and for every $10, the Kaihanim knew they got to bring a knife. Once you put it in, we know for sure the Kaihanim's reason when they do their job, you can be 100% guaranteed to take it to the bank that they're going to bring those karbanos. But you going to the mikveh is not 100% as sure as that. Therefore, if you're mechutz kippurim, as long as you paid already, we let you be part of the Korbon Pesach. But if you're tummy mak sheretz, even though you could go to the mikveh, we won't let you be part of a Korbon Pesach. So you're telling me that according to Rav, really even a tummy b'sheretz midaraisa, you would be able to include him in the Korbon Pesach, because he could make himself tar by going to the mikveh. It's only v'rabban hu degazher bei, right? And you're saying the only reason why you don't let is we're afraid he won't go. That means technically he's allowed, but we're not letting him because we're afraid he's not going to go to the mikveh. V'rabban hu degazher bei. The problem is v'amar Rav, the Bach changed it. V'amar Rav, Rav said mitaman echad men b'sheretz. A couple of blot ago, we had a situation where Klal Yisrael was exactly 50-50, 50 tamei, 50 not tamei. And Rav suggested, in order to allow all of Klal Yisrael to make the Korbon Pesach b'tumah, let's make one person tamei. And if we make one person tamei, then now it's right. But if, according to you, midaraisa tumah sheretz doesn't qualify as tumah to stop somebody from joining in the Korbon Pesach, how would it help to be mitama somebody b'sheretz? Midaraisa, it's still 50-50, and therefore you would not be able to do the whole Korbon for everybody b'tumah. Ella l'Rav midaraisa nami loichazi. You have to say, according to Rav, someone who is tummy b'tumah sheretz, even though he can go to the mikveh now, midaraisa, he's not able to read the Korbon Pesach. The Chesiv, it says in the pasuk, ish ki yeh tamei l'nefesh. But by Korbon Pesach it says an ish who's tamei l'nefesh. So what does it mean tamei l'nefesh? This fellow was tamei for a nefesh, means he came in contact with a mace. What was the case? Miloy askinan shekol shvi shaloi liyos be'erev Pesach. Wouldn't it also include somebody who today is the day 7? If Erev Pesach was day 7, which means after his last zrika, he's going to become tar. Really, that's the same thing as Tumah Sheretz. Tanya Tumah Sheretz. It's no different than Tumah Sheretz. Right now I'm Tamei. Tonight I won't be Tamei. And I'm missing a small step. Yet the pasuk says regarding this type of person that he cannot bring the Korbon Pesach today, he could only bring it by Pesach Sheni. So that's how I know that a sheretz, someone who's Tamei b'tumah sheretz, cannot bring the Korbon Pesach. Now Tosfos asks, I don't understand. Why would Moshe Rabbeinu have told a guy who's a tumah sheretz to wait till next Pesach? You should have told him go to the mikveh. Right? That's what he should have done. Go to the mikveh and join in this week's Pesach. So Tosfos says, let's finish the Gemara first, and we'll see. We'll see. Tosfos is here at the bottom. He should have told him to quickly toivel, and then they're at full yom, and everybody holds at full yom is allowed to be part of the Korbon Pesach. The Shema Kain also. Maybe that's what they did. Maybe, yeah, that could be what he told them to do that, and they did it. But at the time when they asked him, they didn't toivel yet, and he said, the way you are now, you have no choice. Maybe that's really all Moshe told him. If you don't toivel today, you'll be titchel Pesach Sheni. So let's see what it says over here. So we know from Ishus Ki Yatamel Nefesh that even someone who's tummy temporarily, and he can toivel, and he can become tar tonight, he would not be allowed to participate in the Korbon until he actually went to the mikveh. How do you know that that's the case? Zok Rashi, how do you know that it means that he was tamei on the 7th day? Maybe it means the 6th day. Now, maybe the type of tumah we're talking about is a tumah that could not have been solved by tonight. The haki savala, sorry, the chitema mimai the haki kama, and for the Gemara savala Rabbi Yitzchak, he holds like Rabbi Yitzchak. The Amar was said, "Temei meis mitzvah hayu shachal shvi shalahen liyos be'erev Pesach." All of these people were Temei meis mitzvah, and it turns out that the 7th day was in their Pesach. That's how Rabbi Yitzchak learns, and he learns it from a pasuk. And they tell most of the Chaimer explain Lavavka meis mitzvah. It's people who they had to be mitama to. They had the parents who died, people who had to become tamei, and today was their day 7. How do I know from the pasuk that today was their day 7 and not the day 3 or 4? Shenemar v'lo yochlu la'asos haPesach bayoim hahu. The Torah speaks out not that they couldn't do the Pesach. It said they couldn't do the Pesach today, which we could be medayik bayoim hahu. The ein and yochel la'asos. Today they couldn't do it because today they're tamei. But tomorrow they would have been able to do it. So from the Lashon B'Yemahu, it's telling us that the Tumah here was the seventh day of their Tumah. And even though it was the seventh day of their Tumah, where after there's Rika, they're anyway going to be able to join in the Korbon Pesach tonight. And the Torah said anyway they shouldn't bring their Korbon today. So therefore, who didn't Tamanus Tumah Sheretz, who didn't go to the mikveh yet, will say that Midar Raisa, they're not allowed to be participating in the Korbon Pesach. Dr. Martnan. Zav Sharash de Riyos, a Zav who saw two Riyos, meaning he has a Chiyuv of Sheva Nekiyim. Sheichten Alav Bishvi. On the seventh day, you could check for him because tonight he's going to be Kab Torah. My love, the Loy Tovel. Let's say it's speaking, even if he didn't Tovel. And if he didn't Tovel, then he's like a Tumah Sheretz. Ushmamina, Sheichten Vizarkin, al Tumah Sheretz. Dr. Gemara Loy, the Tovel. We're talking about where he Toveled already. Frank Gemara, he Tovel my Kamash Valon. If you have a fellow who's on the last day of his being tummy, and he toiveled already. So why do I need a Mishnah to tell me that such a person you can include in the Korbon Pesach? He's a regular Torah person. He's like anybody else. Even though he still didn't have Harav Shemesh, there's still one step missing. Kamash Malon, the Shimsham Me'ela Arva. That's the Chiddush that the Mishnah is teaching us. That's something that's going to happen by itself. If there's a step missing, but it's a step that's going to happen by itself, that's not ma'akiv, and such a person will be able to join the Korbon Pesach. And how can I mistavra? It makes sense to say that that's the chiddush of the Mishnah, that it's speaking after the tefillah, and the chiddush of the Mishnah is that something that can happen automatically is not ma'akiv. In the Ketani Sefer, Ra Shalosh Riyos Sheichten Olav B'Shmini. The Sefer of our Mishnah was if he saw three times and he has to bring a Korbon, then only on day 8 would you allow him to participate in the Korbon Pesach, because then he can have his kapara too. The Tovel, if you learn that the Reisha was speaking about where he toveled already, and that's the only reason why he can participate tonight, then Itzrich, then I need the second case of the Shmini. I would have thought, Rosh Reis B'Shvi, if you saw two Reis, now you're on your 7th day. Where there's nothing stopping you from becoming Tar, other than Harav Shemesh, which happens by itself. Maybe only over there would I say that he can participate in the Korbon. Al-Bara Shalosh B'Shmini, the Mechusim Maisa. But if he saw 3 times, which means he needs to bring a Korbon, so on the 8th day, he's not automatically going to become mutter to eat tonight kachim, unless those korbanos that he needed to bring were brought. I would say Mechusa Kapara Loy. I would have thought that he would not be allowed to participate in the Korbon Pesach. Kamash Malon, the Mishnah is telling you a greater chiddush. The Avagab, the Mechusa Kapara, the Zav who's mechuyt to bring a Korbon, and he's on his 8th day, even though he has not yet brought the Korbon yet, still sheichten v'zarkin iluya. You could still can include him in a Korbon Pesach, and you can check to make his rikha for him. Eliyamet rosh deriyis b'shvi, the loy tavel. But if you're going to say that the Reish of the Mishnah that tells us that a Zav who had 2 riyis, meaning he has to wait 7 days, and it's mutter from the Korbon, it's speaking even if he didn't tovel yet, that's a huge chiddush. He didn't tovel yet. So Ra Shalish B'Shlamini Lamali. What additional chiddush is the Mishnah adding when it's telling us the next case of Ra Shalish B'Shmini? Hashi Yesh Loimar Rosh Deris B'Shvi Deloy Tovel. A person who has to tovel today and hasn't toveled yet. The Tamei Ma'al right now he's 100% Tamei. He hasn't toveled yet, and the Mishnah still says Shachtina V'Zakin Nevuya. Yet we could still include him in the Korbon Pesach, and we'll assume he'll tovel. Well, then the next case, Ra Shalish B'Shmini. The Tavalei B'Shvi, the person who saw 3 riyas, and now he's on his 8th day, he had already had to have toiveled the day before. So he toiveled already. The Kalisha Tumah. So he is a very weak Tumah. He already toiveled. He's just waiting for his Karbanis. Like Kol Shekain De Shachtina V'Zakin Neluya. For sure, you'd be able to include him in the Korbon. So why would the Mishnah list off a second case if the second case is a lesser of a Chiddush than the first case? Elav Shmami Na, it must be that the first case is a smaller Chiddush, and Rosh De'Re'is B'Shvi, the Shechtin Iluya, the Tovel. It must be that the Mishnah in its first case, when it talked about a Zav on the 7th day, it must be speaking that he toveled already. And since he toveled already, it's a very small chiddush that he can eat from the Korbon Pesach. The small chiddush is that even though he's missing Harav Shemesh, but something that happens automatically is not a mafriya. And then the Mishnah says the next case where it's on this 8th day and he didn't bring the carbon yet. That's a bigger chiddush because there's something really missing. You didn't bring your carbon yet. The Mishnah is telling us that even in that case, you're also allowed to participate in the carbon Pesach. So let's say the first case is speaking where you didn't toivel. So if you didn't toivel, and still in that case the Mishnah says that you can participate in the carbon Pesach, surely on day 8 where you didn't bring the carbon, surely there you should also be able to participate. Why does the Tana have to list that separately? On the 7th day, sure he's missing tefillah, but the fact is he's in control of the situation. I can control whether or not I go to the mikveh or I don't go to the mikveh. So that's why I'm allowed to participate in the carbon Pesach. Lack of carbon. It's not in my control. I'm reliant upon others. I'm reliant upon the kahanim to do their job. So since it's out of my hands, maybe I can't rely on the kahanim to do the job, and therefore I shouldn't be able to participate in the carbon Pesach. Who told us earlier that you can rely 100% on kahanim, that they're not going to go home for the day until they're makrib all of the karbanos that have to be hukrav. Okay, Azova Shoichnala on day 8. Tani Tama Kamedir of Ada Bar Ava. We quoted a brisa in front of Rabbi Bar Ava. It says as follows: Azova Shoichtin Allah b'Shvi Shala. Now our Mishnah says Azova Shoichtin Allah b'Shmini Shala. The brisa here says something that conflicts our Mishnah. It says Shoichtin Allah b'Shvi Shala. And that's going to be a problem because we know she still needs to bring a carbon tomorrow. So how could you allow her to eat the carbon Pesach tonight if Azava still needs to bring a carbon tomorrow? Amar lei za b'shvi shalah mi chazi. Is it possible to allow a Zava on her 7th day who still needs to bring a carbon tomorrow to eat the carbon Pesach tonight? Even according to the Manda Amar who holds that even if you're Tamei Sheretz, you can still participate in the carbon Pesach. Hanimili Tamei Sheretz the chazi l'urta. The Tamei Sheretz will for sure be able to eat the carbon Pesach tonight after he toilets. But this woman, ad lemachar the mashik kapara lechazi. This woman can't eat the carbon Pesach tonight. She can't eat it until tomorrow. So how could you possibly allow her to participate in the carbon Pesach? So Gemara ema b'shmini. So let's change the words and don't say shayach la b'shvi shalah. Change it to be consistent with our Mishnah. Shayach la b'shmini shalah. On her 8th day, we will allow her to participate. Fekmar pshita. Why do I need? That's pashut. Once it's her 8th day, she can bring karbanos in the morning, and of course she's a regular person. You might think that since the fact that she hasn't brought her karbanos yet, that any time a person is mechuyev in karbanos, as long as they already paid, you could be guaranteed that the karbanos are going to be brought, and therefore will allow her to eat the carbon Pesach tonight. Ravina Amar Nida Tana Kamei. It wasn't a Zava, it was a Nida. Now it's important to note there's a very big difference between a Zava and a Nida. The halacha is a Zava who counts Shiva Nakiyim does not have to wait till the end of the Shiva Nakiyim to toivel. Midaraisa, we wait till the night, of course. But Midaraisa, a Zava can toivel any time during the 7th day. You don't have to wait till the night. It's a Nida who doesn't count Shiva Nakiyim. She just waits 7 days, and she has to toivel at night after the 7th day. So the Gemara says over here, Ravina Amar Nida Tanakamei. And what was the halacha? V'hanida shoichnala b'shvi. A nida, you're allowed to shecht for her on her 7th day, which is going to be shver, because tonight she still has to toivel, right? Amalei nida b'shvi michazi. How could you possibly allow a woman who's a nida on her 7th day, who has to toivel tonight on Yom Tov, how could you possibly allow her to participate in the carbon? Even if you hold that you could shecht for a tamei sheretz, because they'll toivel today and tonight they'll have harav shemesh, and then they can eat the carbon Pesach. But nida lo'urta de shvihu de tavla, she's going to toivel tonight, which is the first night Yom Tov, and she's still not allowed to eat the carbon, because we know every time you have a tefillah, you also have to have following that a nightfall. Since she only toiveled the first night of Pesach, she lost the nightfall of Erev Pesach, so she's going to have to wait till tomorrow night to get her harav shemesh, to get her released to be able to eat karbonos. At Shmini, the of the harav shemesh loichosha, she won't be able to eat anything till the 2nd night of Yom Tov. So how could you allow a nida to participate in the carbon Pesach? We're talking about a nida on the 8th day. her you would include in the Korbon Pesach. Pshita Freiting Mara. That's Pashut. Why do I need a Bryce to tell me that? Hashuma Zova, the Michsur Kapara. Madaka Zova, on her 7th day, on her 8th day, who she's missing a Korbon. An action, a positive action has to be taken. Nevertheless, the Shmini, you still allow her to participate in the Korbon Pesach if it's day 8 of her Ziva. Nida, Veloy Michsur Kapara. Anida is not missing anything. All she has to wait is for the sun to set. Everything's done already. Why do I need the Baraisa to tell me that she could be included in the Korbon Pesach? She's all ready to go. All she needs is Harab Shemesh. So the Gemara, Nida is Strichela. You needed to tell you a Chiddush of Nida. Hakamash Malon, that B'Shmini in B'Shvi'lah, you're right. There's no Chiddush in the fact that B'Shmini, she could participate in the Korbon Pesach, but it speaks up B'Shmini so that you should know that on the Shvi, on the 7th day, she for sure wouldn't be able to participate in the Korbon because of what we said, because she could only go to the mikvah at night, and then she won't be able to read Kachim until tomorrow night. Kidatanya, like we learned in the Brisa, Kol Chayavei Tefilais, any person who's Chayav Tefillah, Tevilasan B'Yoyim, they can toivel during the day, except for 2 exceptions. Nida V'Yeledes is Tevilasan B'Layla. And Nida and the Yeledes, they toivel at night. And Rashi tells us, Nida, we know from the Pasuk, and because we know because we know she's tummy for 7 days, and after the 7 days is when she can first toivel. The Pasuk is V'Tisper La Shivas Yamim the Acher Titar, only after all 7 days are counted, which means it's the night after the 7th, then she can go to the mikvah. And there's a hekesh from Nida to Yeledes that they have to toivel at night. The Tan Yachal Teitfel from Vayim, Hamadoim Shivas Yamim Tia Benidasa, Tehei Benidasa Kol Shiva, V'Yeledes Ikshkis Lanida. So therefore, a Nida will not be able to toivel till the night after the 7th day, which means she will only be able to catch him the night after the 8th day. Okay, it was a tough Gemara, but we got through it.